It was one of those dramatic instances that can occur in time of war. A city full of civilians facing invasion by a remorseless and intractable enemy, desperately calling for the military to bomb that enemy before they surge into the town. In almost unflyable weather, with almost no visibility, a valiant crew volunteers for the dangerous mission, with the fate of the city lying in the balance. The need for heroics like that might have been rather common during the dramatic events of the Second World War, but just not usually in Montana. The 1944 bombing of Miles City, Montana deserves to be remembered. Miles City, Montana began as a small fort built after the Battle of the Little Bighorn and the death of George Custer. The first fort built where the Tongue River flowed into the Yellowstone River was called the Tongue River Cantonment, or Barracks, and was founded on August 27, 1876. A permanent fort was built nearby 2 miles west of the mouth of the Tongue River and was named Fort Keogh. Took its name from Captain Miles Keogh, who died at the Battle of the Little Bighorn and whose horse, Comanche, was the lone survivor of the American force. The name of the town that formed did not, however, come from Captain Keogh. General Nelson Miles was the first commander of the fort. Miles was a veteran of the Civil War and played a large role in the wars against Native American tribes in the West before and after Custer's defeat. The settlement that grew was first called Milestown. According to Miles, whiskey caused more trouble than the Native Americans, and in the spring of 1877 he evicted the sutlers, civilian merchants that were selling whiskey to his men and generally causing him problems. In response, those settlers moved a few miles east, set up shop, and founded what became Miles City. Miles City was incorporated in 1887. The town remained small, numbering 7,313 people in the 1940 census. The town is located in the southeastern part of the state, remained a center for local ranchers, but otherwise waned in importance to settlements like Billings, which became the largest city in the state. The Yellowstone River the town sits near begins in the Absaroka Range in northwest Wyoming, flows north across 692 miles, mostly in Montana, until it reaches the Missouri River. The Yellowstone and its tributaries are considered the principal tributary to the Upper Missouri, which it meets in North Dakota. The name Yellowstone derives from a Hidatsa name for the river meaning yellow rock, which early French trappers applied to the river and has since stuck. The winter of 1943-44 was not a remarkably cold one, only slightly below the 100-year average. However, like any winter, it had the potential to cause problems, especially in the northern plains. A serious concern in many parts of the world are ice jam floods, caused by melting and breaking ice. While the spring thaw usually will allow the ice to melt and break up slowly, if weather warms significantly after a period of cold, ice can break up quickly, especially if rain is added to the equation. There are 2 ways that ice jams cause severe flooding. Ice can form a dam which causes the river to back up behind it and cause flooding, or an ice jam can break, releasing an enormous amount of water downstream. Ice jam flooding can come on quickly, like a flash flood, causing sudden and severe water rise that threatens settlement. The weekend of March 17th and 18th, 1944 was a typical one for Miles City residents. The radio was playing syndicated programs like Pioneer Women of Montana, and the Montana Theater was running the musical She's for Me. The high school basketball tournament was scheduled for the following weekend in Great Falls. The evening of March 19th, however, brought the first inklings of disaster. Warming temperatures sent ice flows down the Yellowstone River, with yet more piling up near the town when chunks of ice from the Tongue River joined the jam. Water levels were rising rapidly, and residents on the north side of town were already evacuating. Ice flows from the Yellowstone River were already damming the river, but the situation became a crisis when large amounts of ice broke free from the Tongue River, joined with it to make a 5-mile-long dam of ice north of the city. The floodwaters came fast, so fast that the people of Miles City lacked time to prepare. Flooding behind an ice jam can occur in a matter of hours. In 2019, a flood caused by an ice jam on Buffalo Creek in Gardenville, New York, saw a 5-foot rise in the river in less than 2 hours. Exactly how fast the water rose on Sunday night isn't known, but it rose quickly enough that between that evening, when residents were first ordered to evacuate and the town's emergency services began working, and the morning, the river's level peaked at 19.3 feet, nearly 15 feet higher than normal. Emergency teams were rescuing stranded families by boat, and around a mile-square section of the town was completely flooded. At least one elderly man remained in his home until Tuesday, when a boat was sent to find him. Another story relates a beloved pup Rover saved by another skiff just as a home's porch floated away. 150 homes were damaged by the floodwaters and up to 500 people were displaced. And worse seemed poised to come. Upstream, waters were high enough that more ice was flowing over a dam in the Tongue River. The evacuees were taken in at the Garfield School, where the Red Cross helped to keep them warm and fed. The mayor of the little town in 1944 was Leighton Samuel Key, who was also owner of the Olive Hotel in town. He was concerned about the damage already caused and what further damage might come if the water continued to rise. The first thing he did was contact the Rapid City Army Air Base, this is before the Air Force became a separate service, to request help. The air base couldn't provide assistance, reporting that fog prevented any takeoff from the Black Hills. Of course, unstopping a river is no simple task. Key's first action was to get a hold of some local pilots. According to newspapers at the time, local business owners Leighton Brud Foster, Fred Cook, and Ted Philbrandt, although another account mentioned Maurice Smith. With help from explosive experts from the town of Colstrip, a coal mining town, and with approval from the Civil Aeronautics Administration, the expedition was prepared to blow up the dam. Armed with fused dynamite, the crew took their Piper Cub over the river and tossed 12 homemade bombs out of the plane to dislodge the ice. The shuddering blast seemed to have dislodged only a little of the ice. Newspapers reported that they were credited with partially opening the Yellowstone Channel, but the town remained flooded. Since homemade bombs didn't work, Key only had one other idea: turn to the military, who had bigger bombs and bigger planes. He put in a desperate request to Governor Sam C. Ford to contact the Army. "Send the bombers," he begged. Ford put in a request to the 2nd Air Force Headquarters in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and a plan was put in place. According to reports, bombs were meant to be transferred to Miles City via bomber from Rapid City, South Dakota, where they would meet a dive bomber from the Bruning Army Air Base in Nebraska. Bruning was a training base, and at the time was training elements of the 407th Fighter Bomber Group on the A-24 Dauntless and the A-36 Apache dive bombers. On Tuesday, March 21st, the Miles City pumping plant reported that the river was at 16.3 feet, well over the normal flow of around 4.3 feet for March. That morning in Rapid City, a call went out for volunteers. The Rapid City base was training bomber crews for high-altitude bombing and had at its disposal a number of B-17 flying fortresses. As officers approached trainees, they quickly found a crew to pilot a bomber to the inundated town. Led by Major Richard Ezzard, the base's director of flying, the 10-person crew also included 20-year-old Staff Sergeant Earl Tagg, who was scheduled to ship out to New Guinea just a few days later. The crew quickly fused and loaded 250-pound bombs onto the plane, and within a few hours, the crew was in the air. Winter weather was so bad that Tagg recalled, "We had to fly by instruments for the first half hour because we couldn't see out of the cockpit." They reached Miles City safely, but cloud cover and winter weather made it clear to the crew that waiting for the dive bomber wasn't going to work. Blizzard conditions and low clouds kept the flights in as little as 1,000 feet, and dive bombing was meant to take place from 10 or 20,000 feet, with the plane angling down at the target before dropping the bomb under 3,000 feet. The weather made that kind of bombing simply impossible. "They changed the plans," Tagg said, "and we dropped the bombs." A raging blizzard in Colorado at the time may have also prevented the dive bomber from even taking off. No dive bomber seems to have ever arrived at Miles City. Ezzard had hoped to drop the bombs from 10,000 feet, but cloud cover kept the plane as low as 2,600 feet, and they prepared to bomb the jam. They took to the air around 5:30 p.m. that evening, and taken aboard a local man to help them find the river, and from their vantage point could see the miles-long jam. Locals, including the Miles City Star editor Lou Grill and Mayor Key, watched from about a mile off, which is as close as the airmen wanted them to be. They were atop the town's tallest buildings, all hoping to see a miracle. The crew passed over the river a few times before dropping a test bomb. Seemed to go in the right place, but you couldn't really tell it did anything, Tagg remembers. The bombs had a delayed fuse that allowed them to explode not on the ice surface, but in the water below. The heavy bombs crashed through the ice and then exploded beneath, hopefully loosening the entire jam. Then the bomber took a few more passes, dropping 6 bombs on each. Reports read that seconds later, a huge plume of ice, mud, and water exploded skyward from the Yellowstone River, sending tornado-like spirals 150 feet in the air. The whole thing was reported live on the radio from the roof of a school. Shortly after, water and bomb-shattered chunks of ice surged down the river. The bombing, which had been designed to smash the head of the jam and allow dammed water to run over the frozen river surface, according to the Miles City Star, had succeeded. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune wrote that the eggs were precisely dropped along the channel, dodging at least 3 bridges that crossed it. Tagg recalled that some of the onlookers, including the mayor, had gathered on the 7th Street Bridge to watch as the river drained and the jam broke up. There were big pieces of ice hitting the bridge. I guess it was pretty shaky, and they got off it real fast, he added. Within an hour, the water was draining in earnest, leaving a welter of ice cakes along the banks to mark a sprawling flood course. Mayor Key reported that the bombing was a complete success, as well as perfect and in accordance with the best traditions of the military. By midnight, the river had dropped 3 feet. As the waters receded and the crews began pumping water out of basements, the airmen were put up at a hotel, very likely the Olive Hotel the mayor owned, and given a fine steak dinner in thanks for their effort. By Wednesday morning, the Yellowstone was bathed within its banks and measured at only 6.3 feet. The airmen left that afternoon, flying low over the town and wagging their wings. Damages from the flood were later determined to reach $97,000. The Miles City flood represents one of only a handful of instances in history of aerial bombardment in the continental United States. Major Ezzard was promoted to lieutenant colonel just 3 days later. He quipped that he likely would not have received that promotion had he hit anything other than the river. He also noted that his was the only U.S. bomber that was asked to bomb an American city during the Second World War. Luckily, while the bombing did relieve the flooding that was threatening Miles City, it didn't seem to threaten any of the other cities that were downstream. By the end of the week, residents of Miles City were moving back into their homes and beginning to clean up. Life was returning back to normal in Miles City. In the 78 years since, Miles City has never had to call upon the assistance of the Air Force to save the town. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.